Dude, Intel just released 12th gen with ECORES. They literally are so great. They double your FPS. You've got to use them. And 3200 megahertz RAM. Dude, are you serious? You have to disable your ECORES and also hyperthreading. Just run the bare cores. And also, just to make sure that it's stable, run LinPack until your first child is born. Now, you've got to run hyperthreading on. Just disable the ECORES, they're useless. So that's got to be the best, right? I just want to play my games at high FPS. Which one do I use? Hey guys, what's going on? It's Chamber here, and today we're going to be doing ECORES on, hyperthreading on, and hyperthreading off benchmarks. Now, my most interesting thing with the 12700K was literally just, do ECORES do anything? Because when you run ECORES, you have to lower your ring frequency. But does the extra cores that you get help in gaming at all? Or are they too slow to actually do anything important? First thing I did actually, in my benchmarks that I did with the 10900K and 12700K, if you remember, were with hyperthreading on and ECORES disabled. So I was just running 8 cores, 16 threads versus 10 cores, 20 threads for my 10900K. And my thought was that's the most fair. There's no ECORES involved. These are true performance cores on both of them, comparing them. But I thought, hey, let's turn the ECORES on and just see what the FPS is. So I've done all of that, and let's go over the actual clock speeds that I was running. Starting with ECORES on. Now, ECORES on is with hyperthreading on as well. So that means that I'm running 12 cores, 20 threads in Task Manager. That's what showed up. So for ECORES on, actually for all of them, my core speed was 5.2. For ECORES on, I was running 44 megahertz ring, which is actually pretty good. But my ECORES were 41. Now, that's not the fastest. There are certain ones that get higher. If you have an Asus motherboard, you can actually check your SP and BIOS for ECORES and PCORES, and then you can see which ones they got. Now, I actually have a very good core for my 12700K. As much as you want to say I'm coping, I'm not. 5.2 is great for this CPU. Some barely do 5. And then for hyperthreading on and hyperthreading off, I was running 4.9 on the ring. Now, I was not actually able to get higher frequency with hyperthreading off. Now, if you are able to get a higher frequency with hyperthreading off, maybe this will actually help you more. Do your own testing. But so let's say you're able to get maybe like 5.3 with hyperthreading off. Maybe that's actually worth it in certain titles. Check and test with your own games. But we're going to go over the benchmarks right now. Everything was in 1080p low. Now, I know a lot of people are like, you got to do 720p. I like to do 1080p because it's a resolution that I know people are actually going to play. Now, that's the only reason why. If the whole market decides to adopt 1440p soon, that's what I'm going to start using. But I don't see that coming in the future. 1080p low, so competitive settings. The games we tested, I tested Shadow of the Benchmark because it should scale with whatever is fastest. I did Fortnite because it's very competitive, CPU bound title already, and then it'll be interesting to see which is CPU fastest. Then I've done Apex Legends. It's a 300 FPS cap, but you can get testing lows is a big deal in that one. Then I tested Warzone because Warzone CPU bound, but you also have to like tune the game to make sure you're setting your threads right. That's what I did. Then we had Counter-Strike. I don't know why I forgot that. The 1000 FPS game. And then GTA 5. I included GTA 5 like last second because I needed another game. This game's really popular on Twitch now with GTA RP, all those custom mods. So let's actually go to the benchmarks now. Okay, here's my testing folder. I tested with CatFrameX on everything. And then, first of all, this is my R23 score. I got 25788. 12700K. The 12900K has 4 more ECORES. But you'll see soon, maybe don't spend the extra money and cope like me. So let's load up CapFrame X now, and then we'll just go and look at our results game by game. Actually, before we do that, I want to go over the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmarks and then the CSGO benchmark. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider, this is with ECORES on. I was getting 308 FPS average at 1080p lowest settings. 6900 XT, 4000 CL15 RAM. So this is 308 for ECORES. Hyperthreading off was 336. And hyperthreading on was 320. You can tell which one is the fastest here. So I've done the math now. And so with an ECORES average of 308 compared to hyperthreading on, yes, hyperthreading on, you are gaining 3.8% with hyperthreading on. Not an insane amount. And then with hyperthreading off, compared to ECORES, you actually gain 9%. It's a good little bit. And then compared to actually hyperthreading on versus hyperthreading off, you gain 5% just disabling the extra threads. Now let's go on to CSGO. Okay, we're going to start out here with CSGO. And something that's really shocking. CSGO got 855 FPS, almost 860 with ECORES on. And then if we go to hyperthreading on, 829.55. I lost FPS. CSGO is notoriously known for being very single-threaded. This is why before 12th gen, IPC and all that stuff, this is why Ryzen was winning actually in this benchmark. Now, let's go hyperthreading off. 813.9. You're losing FPS. If you're a competitive CSGO player, I would highly recommend leaving this on. This might be the same for Valorant. I refuse to install Valorant. It's such a trash game. Something to take note of. If you play CSGO competitively, you're going to want this you're going to want to have ECORES on. Now, the numbers look a lot bigger because this benchmark has such high FPS. So, with ECORES, with hyperthreading on right here, compared to ECORES, you lose about 3.4%. It's not an insane amount. And then if you actually, they're like, I want to go full latency, you lose 5.4%. So that is an additional one. So compared to hyperthreading on versus hyperthreading off, if you're like, I refuse to run ECORES, if you decide to also disable your threads, you're going to lose 1.9%. So we're tied. ECORES 1. Hyperthreading off, 0. Wait, 1. Hyperthreading on has 0. Now let's go to real games and not benchmarks. And let's see. Starting off with Fortnite, we have a win for hyperthreading off, and it is shown significantly. Now, not just the average FPS, which isn't what I want to look at. I want to look at the lows. Now, the lows get destroyed with ECORES on. My guess is that it was hitting the ECORES in part of this game. Now, something to take note of. I am on Windows 10. I know a lot of people are going to be like, why are you on Windows 10? Windows 11 is going to be the one for Alder Lake. No, it isn't. The latest version, 21H2, actually has the thread director in it. So you don't have to run Windows 11, and I wouldn't recommend it. You're going to lose FPS. So, hyperthreading off wins. This was known actually in Fortnite, but I want to test it for myself. You're only gaining 2% in the 1% and 4%. So the average FPS, you actually gain more in this. Hyperthreading on will be fine, but that is a win for hyperthreading off. We are currently 1 win for ECORES, 0 for hyperthreading on, and 2 for hyperthreading off. So let's go to Warzone. Finally, a win for hyperthreading on. So you're gaining barely any in the actual average FPS. First of all, ECORES on just dies. So if you're a competitive gamer in this game, don't have the ECORES. So you're gaining 5% in the lows. This is going to feel significantly smoother. So I would recommend hyperthreading on for Warzone. and then 37% in the 0.1 percentiles. That's insane. So hyperthreading on finally won. One for ECORES, one for hyperthreading on, and then still 2 for hyperthreading off. But maybe Apex will change it. So for Apex, as you can see, they all have the same average FPS because you have to cap your FPS at 300 in this game. So we're just going to look at lows. Hyperthreading on wins. Now, it's only a little bit. You get 0.6% and then 0.4 with hyperthreading on, but still, hyperthreading on gains more multi-core. So if you decide to do some rendering on the side, but gaming is still your main purpose, go with hyperthreading on. Another win for hyperthreading on. So now we have 1 for ECORES, 2 for hyperthreading on, and 2 for hyperthreading off. I'm going to give you guys a hint. ECORES aren't winning anymore. It just goes down straight to hyperthreading on and hyperthreading off. So we have one more game. That is GTA 5. Let's actually make this a lot bigger for you guys. 24. Yeah. Okay. ECORES on. So this is 0.1, 1. This is 3 results. So hyperthreading on, for some reason, lost a significant amount of 1% or 0.1% in the minimums. This might be error, user error. I ran the same benchmark. I ran the inbuilt benchmark, and I think I did pass 3 because that one was the one with the most variance or just FPS difference. So hyperthreading on, hyperthreading off. Hyperthreading off 1. But let's just take this and let's say that this didn't happen because my guess is this was some sort of error and I didn't bother to rerun it. So hyperthreading off 1. 1 for ECORES, 2 for hyperthreading on, and 3 for hyperthreading off. So let's just go straight to the conclusion now. Conclusion time. Basically, if any of your games, and let's say that's the only game you are playing, go which one won. So, have CSGO ECORES 1, running your ECORES, max them out, overclock them. Or go to chambertech.net/FPS and have me do it. Shameless plug. I don't care. If your game likes hyperthreading off like Fortnite, run hyperthreading off, and if you're a Fortnite player running FNCS and need the highest endgame FPS. But if you're someone who wants the best overall experience, I would recommend hyperthreading on. That might sound crazy, especially to the people who like latency. I'm going to recommend hyperthreading on. It's the most, you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to get multi-core performance. A lot of games aren't going to suffer as much from their minimums. Maybe if you're like, if you want to run hyperthreading off, you won't lose an insane amount in some games. But in my opinion, I feel like hyperthreading off is just something that you have to know what you're doing. Me and all the PCs I work on, I leave hyperthreading on. So yes, hyperthreading on is just the most basic one that I would recommend. That's what I'm going to run on my daily rig. So I'll leave a link down below to 12900K, 12900KS, 12700K, affiliate links. Maybe I'll leave a good motherboard. I'll leave 2 good motherboards. If you want to support the channel and buy one after this. But if you're like, do I spend more for ECORES? The answer is no. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button down below. Subscribe if you have not already. And join the Discord. Follow me on my other socials. Links down below. Along with those affiliate links. And I'll see you guys later. Peace. Wait. If you're still here, I got a little surprise for you guys. Oh, boys, it's getting serious. Copper IHS time. Oh, yeah. We're maxing out the 12700 cope.